ಸಂಸಾರದಾವಾ ನಳಲಿದಳೋಕ ತ್ರಾಣಯ ಕಾರುಣ್ಯ ಗಣಗಣಾತ್ಮಂ ದಾವಾ ನಳಲಿದಳೋಕ ತ್ರಾಣಯ ಕಾರುಣ್ಯ ಗಣಗಣಾತ್ಮಂ ಪ್ರಾಪ್ತಸ್ಯ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣ ಗುಣನವಾಸ್ಯ ವಂದೇ ಗುರು ಶ್ರೀ ಚರಣರವಿಂದಂ
ತಸ್ಯ ಕಲ್ಯಾಣ ಗುಣನವಾಸ್ಯ ವಂದೇ ಗುರು ಶ್ರೀ ಚರಣರವಿಂದಂ
ಮಹಾಪ್ರಭು ಕೀರ್ತನ ನಿತ್ಯ ಗೀತಾ ವಾದಿತ್ರ ಮಾದ್ಯಾನ್ ಮನಸೋರಸೇನ
ಮಹಾಪ್ರಭು ಕೀರ್ತನ ನಿತ್ಯ ಗೀತಾ ವಾದಿತ್ರ ಮಾದ್ಯಾನ್ ಮನಸೋರಸೇನ
ರೋಮಂಚ ಕಂಪಾ ಶ್ರುತರಂಗ ಬಾಜೋ ವಂದೇ ಗುರು ಶ್ರೀ ಚರಣರವಿಂದಂ ಕಂಪಾ ಶ್ರುತರಂಗ ಬಾಜೋ ವಂದೇ ಗುರು ಚರಣರವಿಂದಂ ಶ್ರೀ ವಿಗ್ರಹಾರಾಧನ ನಿತ್ಯ ನಾನಾ ಶೃಂಗಾರ ತನ್ಮಂದಿರ ಮಧ್ಯನಾದೋ युक्तस्य भक्तां क्षणयुञ्जतोऽपि वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम्
वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम्
चतुर्विधा श्रीभगवत्प्रसादो स्वादन्न तृप्तान् हरिभक्तसङ्गान् चतुर्विधा श्रीभगवत्प्रसादो स्वादन्न तृप्तान् हरिभक्तसङ्गान् कृत्वैव तृप्तेन् भजत सदैव वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् श्रीराधिका माधवयोरपारा माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनाम्ना
श्रीराधिका माधवयोरपारा माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनाम्ना प्रदीक्षणा स्वादानलोलुपास्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् प्रदीक्षणा स्वादानलोलुपास्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् निकुञ्जयूनो राधिकेलिसेद्याय यायालिबेर्योक्तिरपेक्षणीया यायालिबेर्योक्तिरपेक्षणीया तत्रादिदाक्ष्यादिवल्लभास्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् तत्रादिदाक्ष्यादिवल्लभास्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् साक्षात् हरित्वेन समस्तशास्त्रै युक्तस्तदा भव्यत एव सद्भिर् साक्षात् हरित्वेन समस्तशास्त्रै युक्तस्तदा भव्यत एव सद्भिर् किन्तु प्रभुर्या प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् किन्तु प्रभुर्या प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् यस्य प्रसादात् भगवत्प्रसादो
यस्य प्रसादानगति कुतोऽपि प्रसादात् भगवत्प्रसादो यस्य प्रसादानगति कुतोऽपि द्वयं तु तस्य यशस्त्रिसन्ध्यां वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् तस्य यशस्त्रिसन्ध्यां वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम्
वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम्
नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदान्त स्वामिन्निति नामिने कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदान्त स्वामिन्निति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे जयो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद जय श्री कृष्ण प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद जय श्री
कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Nittai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nittai Gaura Hari Bol Nittai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nittai Gaura Hari Bol.
Namamishwaram Sachidanandarupam Lasat Kundalam Gokule Brajamanam Namamishwaram Sachidanandarupam Lasat Kundalam Gokule Brajamanam नमामीश्वरं सच्चिदानन्दरूपं लसत्कुण्डलं गोकुले व्रजमानम्
नमामीश्वरं सच्चिदानन्दरूपं लसत्कुण्डलं गोकुले व्रजमानम्
यशोदाभियो लोकलाधवमानम् परामृष्टमत्यन्ततु धृत्य गोप्या
यशोदाभियो लोकलाधवमानम् परामृष्टमत्यन्ततु धृत्य गोप्या
रुदन्तं मुहुर्नेत्रयुग्मं मृजन्तम् कराम्भोजयुग्मेन सान्तकनेत्रम् मुहुश्वासकम्पात्रिरेखा कखन्ता स्थिताग्रैव दामोदरं भक्तिबान्धम्
श्वासकम्पात्रिरेखां कखन्ता स्थिताग्रैवं दामोदरं भक्तिबान्धम्
इति दृक्ष्वलीलाभिरानन्दकुण्डे स्वघोषं निमज्जन्तम् आख्यापयन्तम्
लीलाभिरानन्दकुण्डे स्वघोषं निमज्जन्तम् आख्यापयन्तम्
तदीयेषिताग्नेषु भक्तैर्जितत्वम् पुनः प्रेमतस्तं सतावृति वन्दे
तदीयेषिताग्नेषु भक्तैर्जितत्वम् पुनः प्रेमतस्तं सतावृति वन्दे
वरं देवमोक्षं न मोक्षावधिं वा न चान्वृण्णनेऽहं वरेशदपीह
वरं देवमोक्षं न मोक्षावधिं वा न चान्यवृणेऽहं वरेशदपीह
इदं देवपूर्णात् गोपालबालम् सदा मे मनस्याभिराष्टं किन्मये
इदं गोपालबालं सदा मे मनस्याभिराष्टं किन्मये
इदं ते मूकाम्बोजम् अत्यन्तनीलैर्वृतं कुन्तलै स्निग्धरक्तश गोप्या मुहुश्चुम्बितं बिम्बरक्ताधरं मे मनसभिराष्टं मलं लक्षलाभै
मुहुश्चुम्बितं बिम्बरक्ताधरं मे मनसभिराष्टं मलं लक्षलाभै
नमो देव दामोदरानन्त विष्णो प्रसीद प्रभो दुःखजालब्धिमग्नम्
नमो देव दामोदरं विष्णु प्रसीद प्रभो दुःखजालब्धिमग्नम्
कृपादृष्टिवृषियाति दिनं बतानो ग्रहानिशमामद्यं मे दक्षिदृश्यै
कृपादृष्टिवृष्टियाति दिनं बतानु ग्रहानिशमामद्यं मे दक्षिदृश्यै
कुबेरात्मजौ बद्धमूर्तैव यद्वत् त्वया मोचितौ भक्तिबाजौ कृतौ च
आत्माचो बलमुजैव यद्
तथा प्रेम भक्तिं स्वकामे प्रयच न मोक्षे ग्रहो मेऽस्ति दामोदरेह
तथा प्रेम भक्तिं स्वकामे प्रयच न मोक्षे ग्रहो मेऽस्ति दामोदरेह
नमस्तेऽस्तु धाम्ने स्फुरदीप्तिदाम्ने त्वदीयोदरायात विश्वशधाम्ने नमो राधिकायै त्वदीया प्रियायै नमो नन्तलीलाय देवाय तुभ्यम्
नमो राधिकाय प्रियाय नमो नन्तलीलाय देवाय तुभ्यम्
नमो राधिकायै त्वदीया प्रियायै नमो नन्तलीलाय देवाय तुभ्यम् Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,
जय राधा दामोदर राधा दामोदर श्री राधे जय राधा नील माधव राधा नील माधव राधे जय राधा नील माधव राधा नील माधव श्री राधे निताय गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल हरि
Jai Om Vishnupad Balmansa Parajik Chasta Sattarishi Shri Shrimadi's Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Lama Acharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sham Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Shri Mayapura Dham Ki Jai Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Tulasi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Ganga Maya Ki Jai Jamuna Maya Ki Jai Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Damodarastakam Ki Jai Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai Holy Diwali Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled Lord, all glories to the assembled Lord, all glories to the assembled Lord, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Patita Pavan Ki Jai.
नमस्ते नरसिंहाया
Namaste Narasimhaya
प्रह्लादलाददायिने हिरण्यकाशीपूर्वक्षः शीलतङ्कानगालाये इतो नरसिंहा परतो नरसिंहा यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंहा बाहिर नरसिंहा हृदये नरसिंहा नरसिंहदिं शरणं प्रपदे तव करकमलवरे नाकाम् अद्भुतशृङ्गारदलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृङ्गा केशवधृता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे केशवधृता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
केशवधृता Hari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare
जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय भक्त प्रहलाद जय भक्त प्रहलाद जय भक्त प्रहलाद जय भक्त प्रहलाद
Bhakta Prahlad Jaya Bhakta Prahlad Jaya Bhakta Prahlad Jaya Bhakta Prahlad
निताय गौरा हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय जय गुरुदेव जय श्री नरसिंह भगवान की जय जय प्रहलाद महाराज की
Shingadev Bhagavan Ki Jai Vrindaye Tulsi Devai Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prati Devi Satyavadai Namo Namaha Vrindaye Tulsi Devai Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prati Devi Satyavadai Namo Namaha Pindaye Tulsi Devai Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prati Devi Satyavadai Namo Namaha Pindaye Tulsi Devai Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Prati Devi Satyavadai Namo Namaha Vrindaye Tulsi Devi Maharani Ki Jai
सेवा पावो ये अभिलाषी
Radha Krishna Shema Baba Abhilasi
राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो ये अभिलाषी
Radha Krishna Seva Pava Abhilasi पूर्ण होय।
कृपा कोरी कोरो तारे वृंदावनवासी।
कृपा कोरी कोरो तारे वृंदावनवासी।
मोरो ये अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियो वास।
मोरा ए अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियो वास।
नायाने हैरी बो सादा युगल रूपरासे।
आयाने निवासदा युगल रूपरासे।
हे निवेदनाधारो सकीरानुगाता करो।
निवेदनाधारा सकीरानुगात करो।
सेवाधिकारो दिए करो निज दासी।
कृपाकारी करतिए वृंदावनवासी।
दीन कृष्ण दासे कोई ये न मोरा होय।
कृष्णदासी को ऐ नमोर होय।
श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदा ये न बासी।
श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदा ये नवासी।
दीन कृष्ण दासे कोई ये न मोरा होय।
दीन कृष्णदासी को ऐ नमोर होय।
श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदा ये न बासी।
श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदा ये नवासी।
नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी। नमो नमः
कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः।
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पादे पदे।
कानि कानि च पापानि मानिकानि च तानि तानि पादसन्ति प्रदक्षिण पादे।
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पादे पदे।
कानि कानि च पापानि महायधिकानि च तानि तानि मानिसन्ति प्रदक्षिण पादे पादे।
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे। जय वृंदादेवी जय वृंदादेवी जय वृंदादेवी जय वृंदादेवी। जय वृंदादेवी जय वृंदादेवी जय वृंदादेवी जय वृंदादेवी। नित्य गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल। नित्य गौर हरि बोल। तुलसी महारानी की जय।
Gaur Premanandi. Pindaye Tusidevaya Priyaye Keshavasya Vishnu Bhakti Paridevi Satyavrataya Namo Namaha. Pindaye Tusidevaya Priyaye Keshavasya Vishnu Bhakti Paridevi Satyavrataya Namo Namaha. Pindaye Tusidevaya Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Paridevi Satyavrataya Namo Namaha. Pindaye Tusidevi Maharani Ki Jai. Allah Krishna.
My desire is that you also give me a residence in pleasure groves of Sri Vrindavan Dham. Thus within my vision I will always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower carry the angels of Raj. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me your own med servant. This very fallen and lowly servant Krishna praise may I always sing in love of Shri Radha and Gaur. Shri Mati Tulasi. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Kistakam Ki Jai. Chaito Darpanamajanam Bhavamada Vandini Bhavapanam Shri Akari Vachandrika Vitaranam Vidya Vadhu Jivanam Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam Patiparam Purnamrita Shradanam Sarvatmasnam Paramparam Vijayati Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Vaudha Nija Sarva Shaktis Tatra Pita Niyamita Shmarane Nakala Itadrisitava Kripaya Bhagavan Mamati Durdhaiva Mitrishamya Janina Nuraga Vinadapi Sunichena Tarodapi Saishnuna Amani Namanadena Kirtaniya Sadari Nadhanam na janam na sundarim kavitam vajagari shakamayi mama janmani janmanishwari bhavatar bhakti rahituki tvai oi nandatanuja kinkaram patitamam visameva vambudo kripaya tava padpankajastitaduli sadrisham vichintaya nanam galarashtrudharaya vadanam gadagadharudaya gira Ulakai Chitam Bapu Kada Tavanama Grahane Vavisati Jugayitam Nimishena Chakusha Prasayitam Shunyayitam Jagat Sarvam Govinda Virahinami Asli Shavapa Daratam Pinashtumam Adarshana Marmatam Karutuva Jata Tata Vidadatulam Pato Mat Pranatastu Sahivana Para Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Kshakstakam Ki Jai Namo Mahavarannaya Krishna Prema Prudaya Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namine Gaur Krishna. Glory to Shri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses your heart with the dust accumulated for years, and extinguishes the fire of conditional life with repeated birth and death. This Sankirtana moment is the prime benediction for humanity at large. God is present raised at the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we're always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings. And thus you have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names, you have invested your transcendental energies. There is no even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness, you enable us to easily approach you by holy names. But I'm so unfortunate I have no attraction for them. Once you chant the name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, think oneself a Lord who strode the street. One should be more tolerant than the tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the name of the Lord constantly. Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want because I wish to save birth after birth. O Son of Maharajana Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yet somehow rather I am falling in this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, or will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? Or will my voice choke up, and will the hairs of my body stand on end with the recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant in the world and in your absence. I know no one but Krishna is my Lord, and you should remain so, even if sunders me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything. He is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. Shri 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 Justakam Ki Jai.
Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinami Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pachana Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskati.
There are 10 offenses in matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that should be avoided. They are as follows. 1.
To blaspheme the devotees who dedicate their lives to propagating the holy names of the Lord.
2.
To consider names of demigods like Lord Shiva or Lord Brahma to be equal to independent names of Lord Vishnu.
3.
To disobey the orders of the spiritual master.
4.
To blaspheme the Vedic literature or literature in pursuance of the Vedic tradition.
5. Consider the glory of chanting
Chanting
Hare
Hare Krishna
to be imagination. 6. To give some interpretation of the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities on strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. 8. To consider chanting Hare Krishna is one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are often Vedas as fruitive activity karma kanda. 9. To instruct the faithless person by the glories of the holy name. And 10.
To not have complete faith in
chanting the holy names
and to
and
maintain
material attachments, even after understanding so many instructions in this matter. It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against offenses in order to quickly achieve success. Krishna Prema. Now let us offer our humble obeisances unto the Vaishnavas, devotees of the Lord. They are just inside trees. They can fulfill the desires of everyone. They
and
are
their
full
full
of compassion for
compassion
the fallen and conditioned souls.
Srimad Bhagavatam, Grantaraja Ki Jai. Canto 2, Chapter 7, verse 47 again. But first, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutali Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Sabdo Nayatra Purakara Kavan Kriyato. Oh, sorry. Keep forgetting it's 6 verses. Yeah. Sasvat Prasantam Abhayam Pratibodhamatram Sudam Samam Sad Asata Paramatma Sattvam Sabdo Nayatra Pudakarakavan Kriyarto Maya Parait Abhimuke Chavila Jamana Tadvai Padam Bhagavata Paramasya Pumso Brahmamiti Yad Vidur Ajasra Sukham Vishokam. What is realized as the absolute Brahman is full of unlimited bliss without grief. That is certainly the ultimate phase of the Supreme Enjoyer, the personality of Godhead. He is eternally void of all disturbances and fearless. He is complete consciousness as opposed to matter. Uncontaminated and without distinctions, he is the principal, primeval cause of all causes and effects, in whom there is no sacrifice for fruitive activities, and in whom the illusory energy does not stand. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, Prabhupada describes this verse in the following way. He says that this verse is all about the unlimited bliss without grief. And it is an exposition of the unbroken happiness exchanged with Krishna. So, this is a very special verse and purport. Very, very special, because it's giving a window of view of the fifth dimension. There are 5 amazing dimensions of consciousness, right? So this is explained in the 13th chapter, Bhagavad Gita, and 13th chapter, and it's called the Brahmapucham. 13th chapter, 5th verse, Bhagavad Gita in the purport. And Prabhupada says, as stated before, Kshetra is the field of activities. And there are 2 kinds of Kshetragya, or knowers of the field, the individual living entity and the supreme living entity, or Paramatma. As stated in the Taittiriya Upanishad 2.9, Brahmapucham Pratishta, there is a manifestation of the Supreme Lord's energy known as Anamaya, dependence upon food for existence. This is a materialistic realization of the Supreme. Then is Pranamaya. After realizing the Supreme Absolute Truth in food, one can realize the Absolute Truth in the living symptoms or life forms. In the Jnanamaya, realization extends beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing. Then there is Brahman realization, called Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. The next and supreme stage is Anandamaya, realization of the all-blissful nature. So, this verse explains the all-blissful nature, Anandamaya. This is something the Mayavadis cannot in any way experience or taste, because they don't believe that there's 2. They only believe there's one thing, and it's not a person. So how can they experience Anandamaya? It's not possible. They deny themselves that opportunity by their false narrative. So this is the 5th dimension of consciousness. So here is explaining this verse in Taittiriya Upanishad 2.9, Brahma Pucham Pratistam. There's a manifestation of Supreme Lord's energy. So these are different manifestations of the Supreme Lord's energy. And the 5th and topmost is unending bliss with no grief and no fear. unending bliss, or unbroken bliss, or ecstasy. And it is not something that's based on plumbing. You know what a plumbing is, right? There's tubes, and there are pipes, and there's things that connect the pipes and all that. So that's a description of the genitalia of people. So people think that through this genitalia, through all these pipes, they will achieve some ecstasy. But that's not the way one achieves ecstasy in the spiritual world. So therefore, hearing about Krishna's transcendental loving pastimes with the gopis should not be done until one is free of the plumbing concept of sense gratification. It has nothing to do with that. Nothing. So what is it then? What is this transcendental ecstasy? Well, it is felt in the body, but the spiritual body, not the material body. It's not something that connects people materially. It's something that is connected through the bodily movements of Krishna's body, his eyelashes when they rise and fall, his smile, and his different facial expressions. So you could, in one sense, compare it to Bharatanatyam dancers' movements. That is a imitation, not a perfect imitation, but somewhat of an imitation of expressions of love, fear, anger, joy through facial and bodily movements. Now, in the spiritual world, you don't have a material body, you have a spiritual body. You have senses. There are spiritual senses. Now, Prabhupada is going to make some amazing points in this one paragraph we're going to read today. Yesterday we read the second paragraph. Today we're going to read the third paragraph, where he makes these absolutely phenomenal, amazing statements that are very difficult for materialistic people to understand. But this is what everybody wants. They want unending bliss, right? The one thing that they want the most, they reject the process to get it. They want to get it through plumbing. You don't get it through plumbing. You don't call a plumber. Who's the plumber? He's the surgeon that does, transfers monkey glands to old men so they can continue having sense gratification. That's not related to this plumbing at all. And now we're going to hear what it is actually. So he says in the fourth paragraph of this purport, he says, as such, there is an unlimited flow of everlasting happiness without the fear of its being broken, as we have experienced here in the material world. The relationship with the Lord is never broken. Thus, there is no grief and no fear. Such happiness is inexplicable by words. Now, if we just take those 2 or 3 lines, these are amazing statements that he's making. See, if you think about what it means that there is a possibility to have unbroken, everlasting, or unlimited flow of everlasting happiness that doesn't depend on contaminated material senses. It depends on purified transcendental senses that are not subject to birth, death, old age, and disease, in a body that's not subject to old age and disease, and all these let's say, negativities of the material world. One is free of all these negative influences in their life because one no longer has a material body, has a spiritual body. So it says, there's an unlimited flow of everlasting happiness without the fear of its being broken, as we have experienced here in the material world. Well, there is a fear, right? would think, oh, what would happen, if so-and-so died, or what would happen if I die? What would happen to the others that love me or whatever, So, there's always a fear of having these relationships that give joy to a person broken in the material world. But the relationship is never broken with Krishna unless we walk away from him. But still, Krishna doesn't walk away from us. That's what we don't understand. We can walk away from Krishna. Krishna never walks away from us because he's always present in our heart. As Paramatma, he's always trying to instruct us, don't do this, do this. So we walk away, he never walks away from us. So that's different than the material world. Two people get in a big argument, then there's a divorce, and they walk away from each other, right? It's not like that with Krishna. So it says here, therefore, he says, without fear of its being broken, as we have experienced here in the material world, the relationship with the Lord is never broken. Thus, there is no grief and no fear. Imagine living with no grief and no fear. Everybody is living with grief and fear in the material world, right? If it's not grief, it's fear. And if there is a tragedy, it's grief. So these two things are omnipresent in the material world, but not in the spiritual world, because the relationship with Krishna can never be broken. We may walk away from him, but Krishna is still there. He never walks away from us. Right? Such happiness is inexplicable by words, so that's a fact. The ecstasy that is experienced in the contact with Krishna cannot be explained in words, because it's not based on the material body. That's why. It's not based on plumbing. It's based on something transcendental, purified transcendental senses. Now Prabhupada next is going to make some amazing statements. Now, and when you hear this, I don't know, we read this purport before, right? But by going into it now, we're going to see that these statements are absolutely fabulous, stupendous. There's beyond our imagination of what anything we could experience in the material world. So that's why he says that you cannot explain this happiness with words. Such happiness is inexplicable by words. And there can be no attempt to generate such happiness by fruitive activities, by arrangements and sacrifices. So give up all these, karma kanda junk activities. You can't even come close to what you could experience with purified senses and purified mind in Krishna consciousness. No way that comes anywhere even close to it. So it says, but we must also know that happiness, unbroken happiness, exchanged with the Supreme Person, the personality Godhead, as described in this verse, transcends the impersonal conception of the Upanishads. The Upanishads, which are parts of the four original Vedas, don't explain this. This is way above the Upanishadic, statements. See, the Brahmins, they say, well, the Upanishads are the highest authority in the Vedas. Well, that's true in one sense, but the Upanishads have no information about the intimate pastimes of Krishna with his pure devotees. Absolutely no information at all in them. Nor is there in the Bible, the Quran. You see, there's a lot of information, but not that information. There's no information at all about the body of Krishna in the Quran. And there's only a hint of it in the Bible, because Jesus Christ is supposed to be the Son of God. By the way, the Muslims reject that. They say he's not the Son of God. Huh?
He's just the Messiah.
He's just the Messiah. He's not the Son of God. Because if you say he's the Son of God, the Muslims say, oh, no, God doesn't have sex like human beings. Well, that's true. He doesn't have sex like human beings. But still, that doesn't preclude that he can have a son. You see, what happens is if you try and understand the Supreme Absolute Truth with mundane logic and reason, you'll always make mistakes. Always make mistakes. Just like the Muslims have made a mistake here. They say, no, that God can't have a son. You know. So Jesus is only a Messiah, is not the Son of God. And then Michelangelo, he was trying to figure out, how do I paint the picture of God? And the Pope told him he's got wrinkles, he's an old man. So that, you know, because they're basing everything on understanding of the material body. Just like, why is it that in the Abrahamic religions, Judaism and Christianity and Islam, they bury the body? Why do they bury the body? Huh? Yeah, in other words, you have to have your body to be resurrected when Jesus comes again, the second coming. If you don't have a body, so what did they do with bin Laden? You know, they threw his body in the ocean, in somewhere in the Indian Ocean, so that it would just be rotted and eaten by fish and decomposed completely. They didn't say, oh, well, here's his body, you can bury him in your Muslim cemetery. No. And what did the Russians do when they were fighting with the Afghanis? Every time they killed an Afghani and they had the body, they would wrap it in pig skin and bury it. That's like the ultimate insult. They would wrap it in a pig skin. They'd kill a pig and wrap the body with it. You know, so we see the cemetery with all the bodies there that decompose, of course, but the bones are going to be there, the skull is there, and so forth. It's a concept. They have a concept that the body and the soul are related. Now, Jesus' body resurrected from the dead, and they actually saw it rise up into heaven. Right? It's described in the Bible like that. So, in other words, even though Jesus' body that's resurrected is no longer, well, in a sense, it's still a material body. It's the same body that he had, right? But it's become spiritualized. So, you see, Christianity has a lot more transcendental information than Islam or Judaism. But the interpretation of it is not always correct. That's unfortunate, because they relied on Greek philosophy to understand the philosophy of Jesus and the New Testament. So did the Muslims. So did, and to some extent, the Jews also relied on Greek philosophy. Maybe less than the others, but so when you read the explanation of philosophy according to Islam, one of their greatest scholars is his name is I'll think of it in a minute. So anyway, but he used Greek philosophy to try and figure out, you know, who is Allah, what is their religion about. And then when you go to Catholic Church, it was Thomas Aquinas, and he was trained in Greek philosophy also. So if they used the Vedic philosophy, they would have got many more things right. But because they were depending on Greek philosophy, they made some major mistakes, such as portraying God as an old man, or in Islam saying that God can't have a son. Anytime you say God can't do this or that, you've made a mistake. Yeah, he's not God anymore. Just like one time I was on a televised program on what we call public television. We used to have a regular program also. I used to go every week and do a program, and it was televised. And but I was also on another program, and the person that ran that program, his name was Salim. I used to call him Slime. He one day asked, "Why are you mispronouncing my name?" I said, "No, this is the correct pronunciation. It's Slime." Anyway, one day on one program, we were Slime and the person that was a member of he was a Sikh. So they both agreed that God doesn't have a body. and that God doesn't have a son, and all these different things. So I told him, I said, this is what you're saying is nonsense. And they were like, they just couldn't understand why I was saying that, right? And I said, anytime you say God cannot do this or that, you have made a mistake. God can do anything he wants, right? And if you say God doesn't have a body, then you have insulted God. And the Muslim got really upset. What do you mean insult God? I'm not insulting. You're the guy that's insulting. No, I said, you have blasphemed God. Because you're saying that Allah, who's the greatest of all, is less than you. Because you have a body and you're saying he can't have a body. You just insulted God. I said, you are the worst insulter of God. And they were like shocked. And both of them kept quiet after that, And then, so you see, as long as you use only mundane logic and reason, or you use some kind of philosophical basis like Greek philosophy, you're going to make a mistake. Guaranteed, 100%. You're going to make many mistakes. So here it says, but we must also know that unbroken happiness exchanged with the Supreme Person, the personality of God as described in this verse, transcends the impersonal conception of the Upanishads. So he doesn't say the impersonal conception of the Mayavadis. He says the Upanishads. See? In the Upanishads, the description is more or less negation of the material conception of things. But this is not denial of the transcendental sense of the Supreme Lord. That's a huge statement he just made. It's a huge, huge statement. Denying the material conception of things does not deny. In other words, you say the senses are contaminated. There are many misconceptions in the mind. People have false ego. These are all negations, right? That doesn't mean God is subject to the same negations as we are. And that doesn't mean that because our senses are contaminated, that means if God appears in the world with an apparently material, mundane, like a mundane person, that doesn't mean that his senses are contaminated like ours. You see, this is the problem people have. This is called Atmavan Manyate. Huh? Yeah, Atmavan. In other words, you project your limitations on God. You're seeing God, you say, oh, well, he looks like me. That means he must be having the same foibles or limitations that I have. He's got 2 arms, got 1 head. He doesn't have 4 arms. If he had 4 arms, I'd be more careful what I say. But he only has 2 arms and 1 head and 2 legs, so that means he's like me. No, he's not like you at all. It's not like us. So therefore, Prabhupada says, in the Upanishads, the description is more or less negation of the material conception of things. But this is not denial of the transcendental senses of the Supreme Lord. So now, what does this mean, the material conception of things? So I wrote a booklet that explains this in depth. And what is the material conception of life? Let me just read a little introduction to that. So it says, what is the material conception of life? The material conception of life means forgetfulness of Lord Krishna and everything that follows such ignorance. When we dream while asleep, we may experience many bizarre and nonsensical dreams. On awakening, we become conscious that the dreams were not actual physical experiences. When a person becomes Krishna conscious, he realizes that the material world is full of illusory and false things. Gradually, he becomes detached from affection for society, friendship, and love, which often lead to deception and frustration. In material life, one is subject to the laws of karma, and one cannot avoid its reactions. The modern civilization is attempting to avoid the miseries of life, like birth, old age, disease, and death, by advancement of material scientific knowledge. These attempts only entrench the people more into the material conception of life. with the false hope of achieving material peace. So material conception of life, right from the beginning, it's material conception of life means forgetfulness of Lord Krishna and everything that follows such ignorance. Okay? So what is modern material scientific knowledge all about? It will entrench people more into the material conception of life, meaning forgetfulness of God, with the false hope of achieving material peace, happiness, and love. So see, they sugarcoat it. Just like, would you eat an ant? No, you would never eat an ant. Would you eat a chocolate-covered ant? Maybe. Something you would never eat, you might eat it because it has chocolate cover on it. See? So they just chocolate-covered the material conception of life by saying, you will achieve peace, material peace, happiness, and love. See? So this is the way they sell things. They envelop it in something that sounds wonderful, right? But actually, it's a trick. See? Just like Obama and Biden, they said, well, if we pass the Obama law, or what was that? You get free medical aid, right? Obamacare. If we pass Obamacare, you can choose any doctor you want, and you won't have to pay anything, and it'll be given to everyone, even people who have pre-existing conditions, and the poorest people will get all the best care, just like Obama gets. All of that was a lie. That was the sugar coating, right? And they just lied openly and sugar-coated it, and then people accepted it. Oh, yeah, we're going to get this, we're going to get that. And the proof is, I got an Obama telephone. He was giving out free cell phones before the second election. So people said, well, I got the phone. That means I'll get everything there's promising, right? They got a little bit, but very little, not much, right? So sugarcoating something is the way you can sell it. And this is the deception that's taking place all the time. And just like Trump was saying, well, you vote for me, I'll build the wall. I'll build the wall, and I'll put China in its place, and I'll do this, and I'll do that, just trust me. Well, he did some things, but not the full promise that he made. See, they can never satisfy all those promises or realize all those promises. Most of it is things that they're never going to do. They do some little things, but not much. So then people get angry. Just like there was a big election yesterday in Virginia, and the Democrats lost, and they were sure to win. What is his name? Biden won the state by I think 12%. It was landslide in Virginia when he was elected president. And they just lost the governorship. They can't believe it. It's like unbelievable they did that. And it was all based on the black vote. And a lot of black people voted for the Republicans, maybe the first time in their life. See? So you see why? Because the governor is a radical, let's say a radical progressive, and he was trying to take guns away from the people, even though the Constitution says people can have guns, right? He was trying to pass his own laws. He was trying to pass a law that you can kill a child even after they're born, up to 10 days. He tried to pass that law in his state, and other things, all crazy things, the progressive thing. So I'm not for Trump or Republicans. I'm not for the Democrats. I'm for Krishna consciousness. So anything that deviates from Krishna consciousness, whether it's this politician or that politician, they're nonsense, and they should be, revealed to be complete nonsense. In fact, most politicians are nonsense. So it doesn't matter what party they're with. So here it says that in material life, one is subject to the laws of karma, and one cannot avoid its reactions. The modern civilization is attempting to avoid the miseries of life, like birth, old age, disease, and death, by advancement in material scientific knowledge. These these attempts only entrench people more into the material conception of life with the false hope of achieving material peace, happiness, and love. Rather, they experience more complicated life situations and miseries and only have temporary pleasures which are more lust than real love. The intelligence of the materialist becomes corrupted by continual activities prompted by passion and ignorance. They become convinced that the goal of life is sense gratification. This distracts the mind from the pursuit of self-realization, which should result in the realization one is the eternal servant of Krishna, and thus one should engage in his loving devotional service. Such misconception of life diverts one's attention to pursuing the attempt to acquire more and more money so that one may have unrestricted sense enjoyment. Thus one is overwhelmed by the material conception of life, which is summarized as follows. Point 1. Attachment to the objects of sense gratification. Point 2. One is preoccupied by many material desires, and when one is frustrated, he or she develops hatred and envy. 3. One seeks happiness outside of himself by enticing victims for his sense gratification. He seeks the company of other persons suffering from the same illusions. He dislikes the feeling of loneliness and seclusion as long as he feels successful in materialistic society. He has a tendency to overindulge in eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. He loses control over the activities of the senses and the mind. Due to identifying oneself with the temporary body rather than the eternal soul within the body, he develops the false ego that he is the body and identifies himself with temporary designations of family, race, ethnicity, nationalism, etc. 7. He tries to prolong his existence in the temporary body by material strategies of diet, bodybuilding, supplements, plastic surgery, and other medical procedures. 8. Because of all his misconceptions, he develops the false ego and becomes falsely proud of his temporary material achievements. 9. He is never satisfied, and whenever he is frustrated in achieving his material goals, he becomes angry and resentful and always blames others for his failures. And that was Trump. That was definitely Trump. 10. When he cannot get as much sense gratification as he wants, he becomes angry and delusional in his behavior. 11. He over-endeavors to acquire material sense objects and always seeks to be praised for his material possessions and achievements. Definitely true. 12. He becomes completely entangled and attached excessively to material things, and in his total state of bewilderment loses all interest in spiritual knowledge and God-related pursuits. 13. His mind then is overwhelmed by material considerations, and he becomes continually anxious and fearful as he gets older, sick, and approaches death. There are 3 stages of the material conception of life. 1. Negligence of spiritual life because of too much attachment to material pleasures. 2. Fear of an eternal, spiritual, personal identity that gives rise to the mistaken concept that one may merge into the homogeneous oneness of the impersonal light called the Brahman effulgence. 3. Or the conception of void after death that comes from frustration in life, from which one develops disbelief in everything, being angry at all sorts of spiritual speculation out of hopelessness. One may adopt different forms of intoxication, and any hallucinations one may experience are accepted as spiritual visions. Another aspect of accepting the material conception of life is the perverted material understanding one develops of the different species of life due to ignorance of the soul. One sees only the different types of bodies of living beings: dog, cat, man, elephant, insect, fish, bird, etc. The reality is that the individual soul in each species of life has nothing to do with the incidental bodies that entrap them. One receives a material body according to the different fulfillment, different unfulfilled desires of the previous life and karma, the good and bad reactions of activities. The Bhagavad Gita explains how to see correctly. One who sees the supersoul accompanying... So anyway, that's next. But this is the material conception of life. This is what Prabhupada is talking about. So he says, in the Upanishads, the description is more or less negation of the material conception of things. But this is not denial of the transcendental senses of the Supreme Lord. Why? Because whatever we see in this world is a perverted reflection in darkness of what's in the spiritual world. So we have senses, that means, and we are a person, that means Krishna is a person and he has senses. But there's a difference. His senses are interchangeable. In other words, he can eat with his eyes and see with his ears. We don't have senses like that. And his senses are not contaminated by any material concept. That's why in this verse it says that he is the principal primeval cause of all causes and effects, in whom there is no sacrifice for fruitive activities, and in whom the illusory energy does not stand. So we are full of the illusory energy covering our soul. That Krishna is not covered. Even when he comes in the material world, he's not covered by a material body. He's not covered by any illusory concepts, and the illusory energy does not influence him at all. Okay. Herein also the same is affirmed. Now this is the amazing statement. Herein also the same is affirmed in the statements about the material elements. They are all transcendental, free from all contamination or material identification. And also, the liberated souls are not devoid of senses. Otherwise, there cannot be any reciprocation of unhampered spiritual happiness exchanged between them in spontaneous, unbroken joy. All the senses, both of the Lord and of the devotees, are without material contamination. So he made two huge statements here. He said that the material elements are transcendental. And he said that the senses of the living entity are transcendental. They're temporarily covered by the material body and corrupted, but they're actually transcendental. They're not subject to the same imperfections. That's only because of the false ego. So these are big statements. Now, it would be impossible for us to purify our senses and regain their functioning as spiritual senses if they were only material. If they were only material, it would be impossible to transform them into something spiritual. But because they are spiritual, and because they are never really contaminated, see, just like sometimes Prabhupada says, this body is a combination of body and soul, or body and spirit, or material energy and spiritual energy. But actually, it's not true. Sometimes they describe it like that. But the soul, it does never chemically bond with the body. You have to understand this. Even though they sometimes describe it as a combination, it doesn't mean that they're combined. It just means that because the soul and the body never combine. Now, this is what the atheists say. If there is a soul, it's a product of material or chemical bonding. No, it's never chemically bonded, or it's never made up of chemicals or material or matter. So unless we get these concepts straight in the mind, I mean, today we just heard something that we probably never realized, that the material elements are transcendental because they're coming from Krishna: earth, water, fire, air, ether. And our senses are actually transcendental, but they're corrupted now. And because they're only corrupted, it's possible to purify them and regain our spiritual, regain functioning spiritual senses, even in the material body. It's possible. Just like Sanjay as an example. He's seeing and hearing what's happening hundreds of miles away from him in real time. And there's no wires, and there's no internet or anything like that, right? He has his own internet, right? It's called the Krishna net. So, because his senses are purified. So these are two amazing statements. I mean, would you agree? Would you agree with that? Did you realize these things, that the material elements are transcendental? That the senses are actually transcendental? No.
Somewhere another example is given, just like the shirt also has hands, mainly because the body has hands. In the same way, we have material senses right now, because actually there is a spiritual sense for every one of them.
Okay, well, that's no. The soul has its spiritual body. Therefore, when you get a body, it could only be covering something that's already there, right? It's not that, let's say you make a paper, you can make a paper horse, right? But you could easily crush it, and then it would no longer look like a horse, because there's no horse inside of it, right? So your body takes a certain form, because your soul has a form. Right? Now, it might not be exactly the same form as your soul, because the false ego and karma will determine, and your desires will determine what kind of body you're going to get. But it's not built up on nothing. It's built on something, right? Just like the paper horse is built on nothing, on air, right? So you crush it and it loses its form. It no longer is a horse. But your soul has a form, therefore the body you get is built up on that, right? As soon as the soul leaves the body, it collapses, right? It loses its form. So you can only construct on something that's solid. You can't construct on just on air, otherwise it can collapse very easily. Just like when they build a building, it's built up on the basis of either steel things or wood things or something. It has to be built on some basis. If it's built on nothing, then it can collapse very easily. Okay, yeah. It doesn't mean that your shirt has hands. The shirt looks a little bit like your body because it's covering it. But the soul has hands. The soul has feet. The soul has, so it's don't say that the shirt has hands. It doesn't have hands. You take the shirt off, there's no hand there. Go ahead.
Actually, Prabhupada says, actually everything only spiritual. But because people cannot understand, at lower level we have to preach like this, material and spiritual. But at a higher level, only everything is spiritual.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Prabhupada said, because people can't, we have to differentiate this because people cannot understand this.
No, listen, the material world is spiritual. It's called apara prakriti. It's the inferior spiritual energy of the Lord. It's still spiritual because it's eternal. The material matter is eternal. It's not, and then even in science they know this. They say it's conservation of energy. That means you can't destroy it. See? So whenever something is eternal, it is spiritual. Okay, so then in this purport, Prabhupada says, and also the liberated souls are not devoid of senses. Otherwise, there cannot be any reciprocation of unhampered spiritual happiness exchanged between them in spontaneous, unbroken joy. So you need senses in order to experience joy and love and all these things, So there's a big debate all the time amongst the scientists. What is consciousness? They can't exactly explain it. Is it something material or is it something, para-material, above matter, right? So they want to prove that it's made of matter. And then, so when they do artificial intelligence, they're trying to imitate consciousness. Can artificial intelligence imitate human consciousness? It can imitate some things, but not the whole thing. See? So because they can imitate a little bit, they say, "Oh, we did it already." See? No, there are things that even the scientists admit. Can the computer love someone? can the computer express affection? Well, they can program certain phrases like "I love you," But does that mean the computer actually loves you? So you see, they're just bluffing. They're just bluffing, And they're all saying, "Oh, one day the computers will take over." This is nonsense, All you do is turn off the electricity, the computer turns off, right? Or you take the battery, just like Garuda was telling me the other day. Well, I got this phone, but the battery keeps turning off. I charge it for 4 hours and it only works for like 5 minutes. I said, Prabhu, just go buy a new battery. They have batteries. You take the battery because the battery is the source of the energy of the cell phone, right? It's not running on its own. So I said, there's something wrong with the battery. Just throw that battery away and go get a new one. So, oh, okay, yeah, I'll look on the internet. I'll get a battery later. So you see, you turn off the electricity, the computer won't work anymore. No matter how many "I love you" phrases and AI you have, electricity goes out, the whole thing flops. Just like if there was no sun, everything would die in the universe right away, right? And the sun has been pouring out an amazing amount of energy for unlimited time, right? So where's all that energy coming from, right? And if it even stopped for 1 minute, the whole universe would implode. Okay, so here we see all the senses, both of the Lord and of the devotees, are without material contamination. They are so because they are beyond the material cause and effects, as clearly mentioned herein, Sad Asata Param. Yeah, because there are no material causes. So this defeats the statement of the scientists that one way we will create AI that will be equal to human consciousness. No, you can't do that. It's impossible. See, all these are false promises that they make. This the sugar-coating of nonsense, so that people will accept the nonsense because it's sugar-coated. So here Prabhupada says, they are so because they are beyond the material cause and effects, as clearly mentioned herein, Sad Asata Param. So, now we read this purport, right? Did you understand all these things from that reading? No, and we won't understand everything from this reading either. This has many, many deep levels of realization. We can't. It's like a kaleidoscope. We can't get to the end of it. It's so. These are all huge statements expressed in very simple language. See, huh?
Okay, I will read the conversation. This is room conversation, August 17, 1971 in London.
Yeah.
Prabhupada says, Revadanandan Prabhu says, there is some distinction between the nature of the soul and the nature of the body. Prabhupada says, that distinction is inconceivable. You cannot make clear distinction. Therefore, it is called achintya. Revadanandana. The distinction between the soul and the body, Prabhupada says, you cannot make a clear distinction. Therefore, it is called achintya. Achintya Veda Veda Tattva. Inconceivable, one and different simultaneously. Revadanandana. Sometimes people ask, Prabhupada says, these questions are not to be discussed in public. These are very higher understanding. For public, should be, this is matter, this is spirit. That's all.
Right. But here he's saying that the matter is also spiritual. Say.
Ultimately, it's all Krishna's energy.
No, if you say to someone who's eating, mating, that matter is spiritual, they say, I always knew that, I always knew that, when I have illicit sex, it's actually spiritual.
That's exactly how some of the Mayavadi interpret it also, because everything is all...
Yeah, it's all one. It's all one. Yeah. Well, the Mayavadis clearly say that this whole world is an illusion. It does not really exist. So that's another nonsense, right? But to say that everything is spiritual, including all the nonsense people do, that's dangerous philosophy, right? So you see how complicated this subject is. It's not simple. So that's a good thing. So he said, it's not to be discussed in public, right? Yeah, as soon as you say everything is spiritual, I mean that's giving them complete freedom to do nonsense.
It's only spiritual if it is used in the service of the Lord.
Well, then the spiritual quality of it becomes revealed. Yeah. But do they accept to do everything in the service of the Lord? No. They're doing everything in their own service. Yeah. So how are they going to reveal? How is it going to be revealed to them? So that's why Krishna says, Tesam satati yuktanam. You have to surrender to the Lord and engage in loving devotional. So not just surrender to the Lord. You have to engage in love, and it has to be haitukiya pratihata, without any stoppage and without any material motive. Haitukiya pratihata. So there are a lot of, let's say, refinements that you have to follow everything integrally. It doesn't work if you just do, just like we say, like that Hindi saying, Bir Hakim Khatre Jan. Half doctor is no doctor. Half doctor means you're dead, right? You have to have a real doctor, right, who knows what he's doing. So in the same way, you have to accept the whole enchilada. You can't accept half the enchilada, then it will fail, right? So here it says, one receives a material body according to the different unfulfilled desires of previous life and karma, the good and bad reactions of activities. Okay, so now we'll go back to Prabhupada's purport. So he says, the illusory material energy cannot work there, being ashamed before the Lord and his transcendental devotees. In the material world, the sense activities are not without grief, but here it is clearly said that the senses of the Lord and the devotees are without any grief. There is a distinct difference between the material and spiritual senses, and one should understand it without denying the spiritual senses because of a material conception. There you go. People will say, oh, no, there's nothing after death. There's nothing. And that's my prayer. I'm praying to, I don't know who I'm praying to, but I'm praying that there's nothing after death. Well, how do you know there's nothing after death? Right? Every day they go to sleep, in a sense they die. And then they wake up, they're still alive. So they were alive when they thought they're dead, when they go to sleep and they lose their consciousness, in a sense. Even in sleep there's consciousness, but it's not functioning the same way that it does when you're alive. So you could compare death to just sleep for a certain period of time, and then they take birth again. So it's just like every day we go to sleep, it's like we died, right? We're not, you're not working at Microsoft when you're sleeping, and you're not making money when you're sleeping. You're not paid for the time you sleep, right? You're only paid for the time you're awake. So it's like you're dead, But then you wake up and you're there again. So the same thing with death. You die, you go to sleep a little bit, and then you wake up, and now you have 4 legs and a tail, but you're still alive, right? So then next it says, the senses in the material world are surcharged with material ignorance. Wow. In every way, the authorities have recommended purification of the senses from the material conception. So we discussed with the material conception, it's a very profound thing, right? And it's very deep and it's very entangled. And it's almost impossible to get rid of the material conception. It's only through Krishna consciousness and through this regular hearing. There's no other way. Yes, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. And then it says, in every way the authorities have recommended purification of the senses from the material conception. In the material world, the senses are manipulated for individual and personal satisfaction, whereas in the spiritual world, the senses are properly used for the purpose for which they were originally meant namely the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Do they teach this in school? No, they don't teach this in school. They teach the opposite. So why would anyone want to go to a school like that, where they're teaching the opposite of the truth? You see? It's like wanting to be a failure in life. Therefore, you go to college and high school and all these places where all the demons have control of the pedagogy and the process of teaching and the purpose of teaching. The schools are slaughterhouses. It's like waiting in line to get slaughtered. You know, huh?
They systematically indoctrinate.
Yeah, they
figured out how to inject all this
into the mind all these false concepts. You see, so why would you go to a school like that? It's not a school; it's prison, where they inject people. You know, just like when the Nazis, they were injecting all kinds of diseases into the bodies of their prisoners, and they would experiment, live experiments on human beings. You know, and you know, just like they do it now with monkeys and with rats and things, right? And if the experiment fails, they just throw it away. So they were doing that with human beings. Not only the Nazis, the Americans did it too, at some point. They're still doing it now with this virus. You know. So, it says, are you ready? You ready? You ready for Aarti? Okay. All right, we'll stop there. We'll leave that next paragraph for tomorrow. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. You see why speed reading? No, not school. It's called the slaughterhouse. How do you say slaughterhouse in Hindi? Prabhu, how do you say slaughterhouse in Hindi? Butcher? Butcher. Oh yeah, boot. Boot means like the. What? Yeah, butcher.
I don't know what we call in Hindi.
You don't know?
Asuri Kana? Kana means a building or what? It's not Krishna's name, Kana, right?
I need to check on it.
Huh?
I will need to check what is it.
All right. You'll check and tell us tomorrow. What? Oh, Kasai. Kasai is the butcher. Yeah. Kasai Kana. Yeah.
Khana is a place. Like
Huh?
place. Khana.
Kana is the place, yeah. Okay. Good. Now we know. Kasai Kana.
Jayo Prabhupada, Jayo Prabhupada, Jayo Prabhupada, Jayo Prabhupada.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhagati Sadma.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakti Sadma.
Bandha muhi savadhana mate
Bandhu mui sabadana te.
जहरा प्रसादे भाई ए भवत तोरिया जाय
Janar prasade mai e bhavatoriya jaye.
कृष्ण प्राप्ति हो जहाँ होइते
Krishna prapti hoya hoite.
गुरु मुख पद्मा वाक्या चित्त कोरिया क्या
Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chittete Koriya Kya.
हारना कोरी हो माने आशा
Arana Koriya Mane Asha.
श्री गुरु चराने रति ऐसे उत्तमा गति
Shri Guru Charana Rati Aise Uttama Gati.
जे प्रसाद पूरे सर्वा आशा
Ye prasade pure sarva sa.
चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से
Chakshudana dila che janme janme prabhu se.
दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो
Divya gyani de prakashito.
प्रेमा भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाशा जायते
Prema bhakti chaha hoite avidya vinasa jate.
वेदे गाय जहाँ रचरितो
Vede gaya janara charito.
श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनारा बंधु
Guru karuna sindhu adana janara bandhu.
लोके नाथ लोके राजीवाना
Lokena lokera jivana.
हा प्रभु करो दया देहो मोरे पद छाया
Aha Prabhu kora doya deya more padachaya.
आहा प्रभु करो दया देहो मोरे पद छाया ए बेजाज घुषक त्रिभुवाना
Ebeyasati bhuvana.
जय प्रभुपाद पतित पवाना
Prabhupada patita pavana.
जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांता स्वामीति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाशता देशतारिणे
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paskata Desatarine
Jayo Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol.
Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Guru Maharaj ki jai.
Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajagatchasti Tarasatari Shri Shri Shrimad Grace Shri Bhakti Vedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki jai Anantakoti Vaishnavinda ki jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai Prem Shri Kahosh Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Vaita Giradhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakti Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Samkunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana ki jai Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Shri Mayapura Dham ki jai, Shri Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai, Tulasi Devi ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Ganga Maya ki jai, Jamuna Maya ki jai, Samveda Bhakta Vinda ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Patita Pavan ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasada Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskati Desatarine Jai Shri Prabhupada Gaur Premanandi Hari Bol.
The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. I bow to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart. From him ecstatic prema emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor, and the Lord and Master of the devotees.